From the City of Angels, near the Pacific Ocean, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. I'm George Noory. This is Coast to Coast AM. The late Tony Bennett would have been 93 years old today. Happy birthday, Tony. Happy birthday. Later tonight, we'll talk about curses. Here's what's happening. Former President Donald Trump has pleaded not guilty to trying to overturn the results of the 2020 election loss, answering for the first time to federal charges that accuse him of orchestrating a brazen and ultimately unsuccessful attempt to block the peaceful transfer of presidential power. The former president appeared before a magistrate judge in Washington, D.C.'s federal courthouse 2 days after being indicted by Justice Department Special Counsel Jack Smith. He's facing 3 criminal cases at this time. 2 U.S. Navy sailors have been arrested on charges of handing over sensitive national security material to China. Petty Officer Wei Hing Zhao, 26 years old, was charged with conspiracy and bribe-taking in connection with taking nearly $15,000 in exchange for photographs and videos of sensitive U.S. military information. And a U.S. Navy sailor, Jinchenko Wei, whose age was not disclosed, was charged with conspiring to send national defense information to China in exchange for thousands of dollars. Cases of leprosy are surging in Central Florida, according to a recent research letter shared by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The author said the Sunshine State has witnessed an increased incidence of leprosy cases lacking traditional risk factors, with trends contributing to rising evidence that leprosy has become endemic in the southeastern United States. Christian Wild from myheartbook.com is with us. Christian, first of all, give us a quick definition of leprosy, if you would.
Well, it's a disease we thought we had long left behind us, maybe 2,000 years ago. But give us a break. Just when we learned, George, that we have turned the corner on COVID, which is another more recent respiratory transmitted disease, we now learn, according to the CDC, as you just mentioned, that leprosy, an incurable, lethal, and unmanageable disease, which we thought was behind us a couple thousand years, has become, like you just mentioned, according to the CDC, an endemic disease in the southern western United States, and particularly in Central Florida, where there has been a speculation that the desert animals, armadillos, may have some responsibility for the new emergence and outbreak. There is some good news, however, to share with Coast to Coast listeners.
Give it to us.
Okay. As leprosy, with a newer combined antibiotic and steroid treatment for 6 to 12 months, is now considered a curable and manageable disease. So where was Merck and Pfizer a couple thousand years ago when we sure could have used their help? Now, according to the WHO, leprosy has continually been responsible for 200,000 deaths per year in the United States. And because of the new treatment, it has now been reduced to about 100 cases per year. The disease is spread through cough, sneezes, or respiratory droplets, which are spread through the air, similarly to the way we have been cautioned against the spread of COVID. We have, as a country, have all had to deal with. And now we're looking at an age-old disease called leprosy.
Christian, I remember the biblical movies. They would always have people that had leprosy hiding in caves and stuff like that. You remember those?
Yes, they couldn't be around people because it's such a highly transmittable disease. And the loneliness of being kept away from your friends and families until your demise.
More information on what Christian does for the world, and he does a great job, go to myheartbook.com. Well, they say 8 habits could add up to giving you an additional 24 years to your life. Get ready to memorize these and write them down. Exercising, not having an addiction to opioids, avoiding smoking, managing your stress levels, adhering to a healthy diet, not binge drinking, prioritizing good sleep, and maintaining positive social relations. Even adding only one of these habits to your routine could provide 4.5 to 3.5 years, men and women respectively. Just two of the behaviors added 7 more years of life for men, 8 extra years for women. Take heed and just do those things. Trader Joe's is recalling 2 more products, a broccoli cheddar soup that may contain bugs and insects, and some ready-to-eat falafels that may contain rocks, according to the company in 2 separate news releases. What's going on with all of this? Let's check in with food safety coach Jeff Nelkin. Jeff, what's going on here?
Well, you were chuckling a little bit, but it's, again, possible, when you're not paying attention to the standards that you're supposed to be following in your food production areas, that these kind of introduction of foreign objects and stones are not, processing, ingredients correctly. Maybe the facility is, falling apart in different places. So there are all kinds of possibilities of, foreign objects falling into it. But when it comes to insects, we're talking about pest control and accessibility of pests, into the food processing environment. So we need to start paying attention, to follow those standards and practices that we should be following all along.
Jeff, we're at the mercy of the food processing companies, aren't we?
Yes, we are. But again, those food processing facilities have their own inspections, and they also have health department oversight. So there are a lot of different groups of people, including Trader Joe's has, some of their own people that go in and look. But again, when you get sloppy at what you do, things like this start to happen.
All right, my friend. Jeff's website, foodsafetycoach.com. In a moment, we're going live down under to Australia to talk about UFOs, multi-dimensionality, and connecting with non-human intelligences. Next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Noory with you. Eesha Patel is a seasoned speaker who is knowledgeable on the topics of UFOs and multidimensionality. In the past 10 years, Eesha has touched the lives of more than 50,000 awakening souls, helping them to heal, awaken, and step into their purpose to assist the planetary shift in vibration. She is now leading the frontiers of galactic consciousness through her modality Origin Activation. We'll talk about that, through which she facilitates galactic content experiences for high-performing visionary entrepreneurs. On her podcast, which is called First Contact, she interviews prominent researchers on the topic of UFOs or UAPs, whatever you want to call them. Eesha, welcome to the program. Looking forward to this.
Hi, George. Thank you so much for having me.
How are things in Australia?
It's a sunny day today down under. How about you?
Everything's good here. I'm out here in Los Angeles for a little bit, but things are interesting. The former president was indicted today and faced charges. It's a mess. It's a mess. But
it is a mess.
Let's talk about some more pleasant things. How did you become a spiritual mentor?
Oh, that's a great question. I went through a really big spiritual awakening in 2015, and my life just kind of flipped on its head. So after changing a number of things, my relationship, my career, I think it was a really inner sort of knowing and intuitive guidance, if you want to call it that I had to be helping people. Meditation is the one thing that really got me through some of the more difficult periods in my life. And so I guess it became the next step for me to then help others in that same way as well.
When you were a child, Eesha, did strange things happen to you that kind of formed where you are today?
You know, they did, but I don't think I really understood the impact of that until my mid-20s. Because I had a couple of strange experiences. Like, for example, there was a house that we lived in, and there was this ghost lady that I would always see at the foot of my bed. And when I was 12 years old, that was terrifying. I would always sleep with the nightlight on because I just didn't want to see her or have that sort of fear. So I think, if anything, having some of those types of experiences weird flickering lights, things just blowing up randomly would happen. And I realize now it's just that, my energy was very open and ungrounded and I didn't know it. But back then it was quite scary. And at the same time, it allowed me to be open to the fact that maybe something else does exist.
These 50,000 some souls that you've been helping, what have you done for them? What happened?
It depends on what people need. Sometimes it's just like, I might put a post out on social media that might reach thousands of people.
Sure.
And that will be the exact thing that they need to sort of light them up or to shift something in the frequency. Other times it's more one-on-one. So at the highest level, I do work with some very incredible entrepreneurs, and I help them to get their vision and mission out into the world. Because I find that entrepreneurs sometimes really struggle with just really implementing and putting things out there. They have a lot of ideas, and they might even have a lot of strategy, but then if they haven't healed their chakras or sorted out their energetics, then no matter how many marketing campaigns they do, or no matter how much they try to put their work out there, they just keep having these roadblocks. So one of the biggest things I help people do is I help them to remove those blockages, especially when it comes to money limitations. And next thing you know, my clients will be going from, they might be stuck at $70,000 a month, and next thing they'll do one session with me and they've suddenly doubled their income that month.
Wow.
So that's just one example of, how energetics can really help amplify. If you know how to expand the energy field, you can see some massive, massive results.
Did you hit any walls in your development getting to where you are today?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we all have our own journey. We're all on the pathway of learning and growing. I think some of the biggest challenges for me, to be honest, my biggest one was recognizing how powerful I really am. And I think in the earlier days of my journey, I would hold myself back, kind of like, this whole tall poppy syndrome thing that we got going on. And so I would try and be like everyone else. So I would try and, fit into the crowd. And then eventually I just had to realize I'm not like other people. I have so many gifts. I see aliens. I see energy fields. I feel frequencies in ways that no one else does. And so eventually I just stopped holding myself back so much because at the end of the day, I mean, I was my biggest wall, right?
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about multidimensionality for a moment. What does it mean to be a multidimensional person?
I love this question so much. To me, multidimensionality is really accepting and embracing all that you are. Now, I want to be clear, it's not just your human self. I'm talking about embracing your past lives, embracing your multidimensional soul aspects, embracing those parts of you that you have access to that you might even not know that they exist. But on some level, you know that they're there. To give you an example of that, I came across one of my soul aspects a number of years ago, and I realized that me here in the 3D, I'm Eesha. Everybody knows me as Eesha. But when I'm my multidimensional self, I also have aspects of my soul that are existing in other time, space, and dimensional frequencies. So when I connected with my fifth dimensional self, her name is Lily, she actually appeared to me a few years ago, and she was on board a starship. So I was in meditation, and I'd already connected with the starship, and I connected with Lily, and I realized that she wasn't one of my guides, or she wasn't, an angelic being or anything. When I actually felt into a frequency, it felt like it was me. And that's when the guides started teaching me that there's a difference between having, spirit guides versus having aspects of your own self or your own soul frequency that are living these parallel kind of experiences, if you want to call it that. So what you can do when you fully access your multidimensional self is you can actually access all of your past life selves, because time doesn't really exist and that's all happening now. You can access all of your other dimensional selves, which are also just there in the here and the now. And you can access your ancestral frequencies. You can access anything that's related to you. And then what you can do with that is you can draw upon that wisdom. So you can draw upon what those aspects of self have learned in those lifetimes or what they've experienced, and you can bring that wholeness into this incarnation. And that really is what I believe is what a big part of planetary ascension is all about.
How many of us are in these other multi-dimensions? More than one?
Definitely more than one. I mean, I'm very closely connected to at least about 4 of mine. So I have Lily in the 5D. Then I've got a 7th dimensional version of myself that comes through in more of a lion being. I've got a version of myself who comes through. It's a planet that I haven't spoken about very often that a lot of people don't really know about. But they are more like jellyfish type of energies, and I know that I have a soul aspect there because I'm very connected to that, and it comes through my dreams a lot. And I've got an angelic self called Anahera who operates in a more 9th dimensional frequency, who I actually have had a photograph of before because I was in the UK on a trip one time, and the song Anahera by Ferry Corson actually just started playing randomly on my Spotify as I was like walking up towards the Glastonbury Tower. And then that's when I first connected. And then a little bit later on, when I was connecting with that angelic frequency, I just felt guided to take a photo up towards the clouds. And when I looked at it, you could see this angelic kind of figure coming through. So that was really quite a cool experience to have that connection really come through in a very tangible sort of way.
I've long suspected, Eesha, that when we go through deja vu, we are tapping into these other dimensions that we exist, and we're, reliving something that's already happened in the other dimension. What do you think of that?
Absolutely. One of the most tangible experiences I can tell you about that one. So I was in Peru visiting Lake Titicaca with a friend of mine a number of years ago. And a couple of weeks before that experience, I had this kind of dream that I sort of remembered. And I remember in that dream, I was on Earth doing whatever I was doing. Then I went back up to this like other space that wasn't on Earth. And it was almost like when I was up in that space, time had frozen on Earth. And I remember having this discussion and thinking, okay, well, what if we just did that experience differently? Or what if, something changed, right? And then we had this kind of like planning session, and then we went back to Earth, and then did it again. And I thought, well, that was a very interesting dream. So then when I was in Lake Titicaca with this friend of mine, he was a few meters away, out of earshot, and they were speaking. There was another guy there that he was talking to, and they were speaking in Spanish, which I don't know a word of. But they had this sort of 2-minute interaction. And then when my friend walked back to me, I said to him, is this what you said? And then he said this, and then you said this, and then this is what you guys were talking about. And my friend just looked at me and was like, how did you know that? And I said, well, I just remember having this dream where this exact interaction happened, but it happened slightly differently. So in that experience, we did it like this, and then today it happened like that. And so it was kind of like this adjustment had happened in that experience, and yet at the same time, there was this feeling of deja vu because I'd kind of already done it before.
By tapping into these other multi-dimensions, what does that allow us to do in this life?
Oh, I mean, that's really the crux of my work with a lot of my clients. You see, because I work with a lot of very high-performing business owners, entrepreneurs, what I help them do is I help them to tap into that so they can gain that wisdom. That's what really it's all about. It's about the wisdom, and it's about the expansion of energy. So say, for example, I'm working with a 7-figure entrepreneur, and they've been stuck at that sort of $1 million mark for 2-3 years or something. But there's a parallel version of themselves who has already done that. They've already hit the $10 million mark. They've already had that global reach that they want to reach. They've already done that next level of expansion. So if I take this person who's stuck at $1 million a year and I help them tap into that version of themselves where it's already happened, what that does is it collapses the timelines. And that's how, when we do this work, so through my modality, Origin Activation, when we put this sort of collapsing into place, then suddenly they'll come to me like 2 days later and be like, oh, wow, I've broken a record that I've never done before, or I've suddenly healed something that I didn't know how to do. And then the effects in their life are so tangible. Money is one thing. Obviously, I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, so that's one of the avenues. But the other one has a lot to do with healing. So, for example, one of the principles in Origin Activation that we embody is that you are already whole, right? And there is a version of you in a time-space dimension where whatever thing you're dealing with doesn't exist. So if you can take your frequency beyond time and space, which you can because we're multidimensional and time only exists in Earth and it's not linear. So when you can go past that time-space barrier, you can access that frequency version of yourself that is completely healed, completely whole, already connected to divine, and experiencing a much more blissful and joyful experience. So when you access that frequency, I have seen countless upon countless instantaneous healings of all sorts of things happen just by teaching people how to tap into that.
We're going to take a short break, but we'll be back with more with you in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Noory with you, Eesha Patel with us. She has got a website that we have linked up at coasttocoastam.com. She's also on YouTube. Let me spell her name for you, Eesha Patel, and you can search for her name on YouTube. But you go to her website. You have a link on your website to YouTube, don't you, Eesha?
I think it should be there, but you can also just Google my name. You'll find all my stuff pretty easily. Just Eesha Patel. I'm on all the channels.
What are the benefits to people to tap into this multidimensional self?
Well, to give you an example, I had one client who came to me many, many years ago, and she said that she'd just been feeling really, really stuck, for months before that. And when she did a couple of sessions with me, we just worked through some lower chakra sort of stuff. We helped her access her higher self, and even just those simple couple of little actions that we did. Suddenly, all that stuckness that she was feeling, and all that chronic fatigue, and all that just not being able to move, and financially being stuck, all of those things lifted just by clearing those energies and connecting. I honestly think your connection to your higher self and expanding that into your multidimensional self is one of the best things you can do for your health, your finances, and your general sense of just being.
How do you get into the mode to do that?
Well, there's a few ways that you can do that. One of my preferred methods, George, is really it's around just meditation, and then a lot of people say to me, oh, but I don't know how to meditate. I don't know where to start. I don't know, I've tried to do it and it's very difficult, and then that becomes a bit of a barrier. So I always say, you don't have to do it alone. Like if you go, for example, to my YouTube channel that you just mentioned, all of the activations are there. So if you have the capacity to just lay on your bed, put on your headphones and listen to something for 45 minutes, that in itself is going to be so, so beneficial. And then, people often report back and they say, look, I finally, for the first time, I know my starseed connections, or I know who I am. Because I know especially for people who are, they know they're here on a mission to raise the frequency. They know they're here to do big things. But if they don't have that connection, you can feel lost as a human. I mean, I've definitely been there. I don't know about you, George, but I've seen you talk about this a lot in your near-death experience interviews, George, and that's a fascinating topic in and of itself. But I know that, when you don't need to, die in order to connect to your multidimensional self. You can actually just access all of those frequencies through meditation, and even if you don't know how, or even if you don't have all the tools yet, they're all available out there. So it's just a matter of making the time for it, setting the intention, and then utilizing the things that people like myself and I'm sure other mentors out there have created to support you in that journey.
How do you know you've tapped into this multidimensional self?
Well, I mean, it's hard to kind of miss it, really. I mean, if you go from being 3D all the time to suddenly, having this voice in your head that says, I'm telling you this intuitive thing that you need to do, or suddenly you start getting these knowings, or you may get a lot of synchronicities. That's one of the ways that people know they've tapped in. They suddenly start seeing these repeating numbers everywhere, or they start seeing feathers, or they start getting these little guidances. Those are probably the early signs. And then later on down the track, I mean, it's as clear as daylight. Like for me, I was sitting in meditation. Next thing, I get this voice that says, "We are the Mayan elders," and that just started a whole chain of other events for me, and how my business started, actually. So I think once you have it, you kind of know that you have it. But I think where people struggle is they don't trust it, and that's really the biggest thing. I actually just got out of a 3-hour Lionsgate event earlier today. And, this event they were all facilitators. Everybody was a facilitator. And yet still, we were having these conversations because some of the ladies were getting this guidance, and then they needed that confirmation to say, yes, that is what it is, or that is, what you're seeing is correct. So I think a lot of the thing isn't so much about how to connect. I think it's when you connect. How do you actually navigate that space? And that's really the fun of it. I mean, 7 years and I'm still going, and I feel like I'm still learning new stuff in those multidimensional realms every day.
Tell us about your healing work and what is origin activation?
So origin activation really is first and foremost a philosophy and a framework. I believe there are lots of different methods out there that you can utilize for healing. I mean, you've got your Reiki, your pranic healing, you've got, chakra sort of things that you can do. There's a lot out there. The pathway that I awakened, and this is so unique for everyone, but the one that's really worked for me was I activated my Merkaba light body. And then later on down the track, I learned about a process called the inner heart meditation. And so what I did was I utilized those practices, and I was able to then access a state of channeling. When I was able to access that state of channeling, I would go into that trance state, and all this information started coming through to me. And one of the biggest things my guide said was, you need to change the way that people look at healing. Now, the big framework that was probably the core of this origin activation work is that when you're the healer, there is this kind of paradigm that gets set up. And it's obviously, it's not something that we do intentionally for the most part. It can be quite subconscious. So subconsciously, we set up a frame that says one person is the healer and the other person is the person being healed. Now, when you look at somebody and you sort of place too much emphasis on their brokenness and you miss their wholeness, then that sometimes perpetuates that very cycle. And so one of the very first things that came through in these channelings was that, Eesha, you need to start seeing people as whole. So when my clients started coming to me, they would tell me, Eesha, I have this ache and I have this pain and I have this struggle and I have this. And I would listen to them because I know that that is their experience and I don't want to invalidate that. But at the same time, I'm tuning into their higher self, and their higher self is showing me their highest vision, their biggest capacity. So when I see that in them, that is the very first step to creating that instantaneous change, because you're not then continually buying into that story or that 3D sort of perspective that they're experiencing. So really what origin activation does is it shifts the frame, and there are other principles as well. We have 6 key principles in origin activation, which you can find on the website originactivation.com. When you start to understand and embody those 6 key principles, what we've seen numerous amounts of instantaneous healing and transformation.
Tell us about some of the most amazing things you've witnessed while doing this.
Look, I've had some incredible experiences. I'd say one of my very favorite ones, I'll give you 2. One is a more entrepreneurial one, and one is a more healing-based one.
Okay.
One of them was a client. Now, this person was already doing 7 figures. They're already doing an amazing job. Like, that in and of itself is a feat. But this person, she kept saying to me, I'm just stuck at like $80,000 a month. No matter what I do, as soon as I go above that period or that amount of money, what happens for me is something happens and then I have to pay a $50,000 bill, or I have to pay this, or this happens, or my staff member leaves, or there's always something getting in the way. Now, whenever people come to me and say that, I say, look, it looks like to me that you have an upper limit. And we unconsciously create these upper limits because that is our safety zone. So for some people, that upper limit might be at like $200 saving in the bank account. As soon as you get over $200, your refrigerator breaks down and you have to buy a new one, So there's a limitation that people sometimes have when it comes to how much money their energetic system can actually hold. So with this particular client, she was stuck at that sort of 80K mark. And we did a little bit of work together. And then that month, she suddenly made $150,000, and she was able to keep it. Because I asked her 30 days later and said, well, did anything happen? Did any big disastrous thing happen to take that money away from you? And she said, no, it's actually there. I've still got it. And so when we did that removal of that trauma or that, those barriers, those upper limits, she was able to then not only make that amount of money, but keep that amount of money. And that in itself is a huge sign that something in your energy field and your nervous system has actually shifted.
What about
the second example I can...
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say the second example I can give you that's more healing related, George. And this is where it gets very much into that near-death experience territory. Because when people have these near-death experiences, they often report back that they've come back into their body and suddenly maybe their cancer's gone away or their aches and pains are gone. And even though people do say it's quite dense coming back into the body, often they do receive a lot of healing. And that's one of the things I've noticed with quite a number of my clients as well. When I get them to access this full multidimensional self, one of the most beautiful experiences I had, and this was very early on in my journey, I had a client come to me, and she was about to go into surgery. And then she came along to one of my group activations, and then 2 days later, she goes into the surgeon's office, and she's doing her pre-surgery checkup. And then they just said to her, "Oh, it's completely healed. It's almost like this thing never existed."
Oh, geez.
And she knew it was because of that activation, because she felt them working on her sacral chakra, which is around the region that her surgery is meant to be in, and there was no other explanation for it. So I really think, you really can believe the impossible, because everything starts in the energy field. So if you clear the energy field, whether it's healing, whether it's abundance, whether it's connecting to UFOs, it all starts with that practice of coming into your multidimensional self and allowing that journey to unfold from there.
Where is the energy coming from?
Best question, and a very good one to address, George. So it all comes from your heart center. Your heart is a multidimensional portal. Now, I know, there's a lot of stuff out there about chakras and things like that, but it goes even deeper than that. When you go into your inner heart space, and the way that I typically visualize it, because humans need a visual framework at times, it appears to me as a beautiful inner garden. When I go into that space, all of these energies relating to my life are there. So to give you an example, today I was just hosting an event for the upcoming Lions Gate, and I was leading a group of facilitators into the Lemurian temples, the ancient Lemurian temples, and we did a bit of a process on the planet as a pre-activation to the Lions Gate. So when I went into my inner heart space today, the whole thing was transformed into this beautiful Lemurian temple, and I could see each of my clients in there and the energies they were connecting with. So when you learn to access this inner heart, this multidimensional portal that we have, everything is there. I know that if I'm ever feeling out of balance, it'll show up in my inner heart. I know when new things are coming on the horizon, it'll show up in my inner heart. I've got these beautiful lion beings in there. I've got my Lemurian temple in there. And the space, the landscape changes depending on where I'm at and what I'm doing at the time. So that energy that we talk about that does that transforming or that connection, for me, it comes through the inner heart space, which really is my internal core and my inner divine connection to source.
And Lion's Gate, is that when Sirius, Earth, and Orion in the constellations all seem to align with each other?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also a Lyrian portal as well. So it connects with the constellation Lyra. So the Lion's Gate really is a very powerful portal. It helps us to bring in those high dimensional frequencies and allows us to really anchor in those energies. Every galactic portal is different. Some of the major ones that people know about are the Lion's Gate or the 1111 Gateway, and there's some other ones throughout the year as well. And so when we connect in with this Lion's Gate frequency, the galactic component of this gateway is very much the Sirian energies, and it's also the Lyran energies. So if anyone wants to connect in, you can tune in by just asking to connect with the beings that reside on the planet. On Sirius, you've got the beautiful whale and dolphin energies that come through the higher 7 to 9 dimensional frequencies. And then in the constellation Lyra, you've got the beautiful lion beings, hence Lion's Gate connection as well. There is actually an activation that's going up later today on my YouTube channel. So if anyone wants to join in that, there is a guided activation on the connection to that frequency as well.
Eesha, what's the number one advice you could give somebody at any time?
I would say really just trust in your flow, and also don't be afraid to ask for help. The journey of awakening and even just being human is not always easy, and it's okay to reach out for support. It's okay to not be okay. And at the same time, always remember that you are absolutely 100% whole no matter what. People think that they're broken, but they're not broken. You're just perfect and you're in your own time. And please remember that you are accepted exactly the way that you are. And if you need support, ask for it, and it's okay. Myself and many other mentors out there are here to help and guide you if you need that.
Fascinating. Can any of this go wrong?
Well, I don't believe in wrong so much. I mean, look, yes, if you try and do some of this work without the right guidance, you may end up in some very dicey territories. But as long as you're going into your journey of awakening with the absolute highest of intentions and you're also willing to do the work, because I will say it's not an easy journey. I've definitely had moments where I've gone into meditations and I've come across some sort of not so nice energies. And in those moments, you always have to remember that no matter where you are in this multidimensional time-space continuum, you are the light. You are always the light. So we think sometimes things are going wrong, but I really am a strong believer that everything in the universe is happening for me. And even if I don't fully understand it at the time, I can learn something, I can grow, and I can take something from that. So it really takes a deep level of trust in yourself and also trust in the divine to move through with that belief system, which then in itself also brings you more positive experiences that are for your best and highest good and your growth.
Have you ever been in a situation where you were just shocked by the results?
Can you say that again?
Have you ever been in a situation where you were just shocked by the results, what happened?
Oh, absolutely. So many times. I have been in this mentoring space for almost a decade now, and still I have experiences where I just go, wow, I can't believe we did that. Some of the bigger ones are more related to planetary level work. So, for example, I sometimes lead groups of people into gateway activations, like, for example, Lion's Gate or other gateways. And we'll do some work maybe on a place or like a location. And then sometimes what happens is we see on the news that something has shifted. We did one a few years ago focusing on Egypt. And so it was the 7-7 gateway. The galactic flow for that one was connecting with the Eridanus constellation, which is the river constellation, and then the Earth connection to that, because there's generally always a galactic connection and an Earth connection with all galactic gateways. And the Earth connection of that